on a sofa or whatever the case might be. And with a book, at the same time, you can be flying around the moon in a spaceship, or riding a wild moose, or petting a singing toaster, you know? Anything's possible. Anything's possible. So I read everything I could get my hands on growing up, and eventually, because I was homeschooled, I graduated from high school at the age of 15, mainly the result of not taking any summer breaks my whole life. Thank you, Mom. And when I graduated, I thought, this is gonna be awesome. No more school. And it was awesome for about 2 weeks. And then I got really, really, really bored. How bored? I got so bored, I went into our backyard and I dug a hole. And it wasn't just any hole, mind you. It was a big hole. It was over 8 feet across, over 8 feet deep, circular. And then we had one of those giant old television satellite dishes that you used to see all over the place, and it was abandoned on our property. So I dragged it over to the hole, and I tipped the dish over so that the dish formed a roof for the hole. And then I piled hay bales on top of the dish, because I live in Montana, and there are lots of hay bales in Montana. Piled the hay bales on the dish for insulation, and then I ripped off bark off dead trees and used the bark to make shingles on top of the hay bales. Now you might be wondering, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Christopher, if you put a satellite dish on top of the hole, how did you get into the hole? Well, I dug a tunnel into the hole. And then I built an entryway for the tunnel. It was about 10-foot long tunnel too, I might add. And then I started chopping down dead trees along the Yellowstone River, chopping them down with a claw hammer, no less. And I dragged them up in front of the hall, in front of the entryway, and I started planting them upright in the ground to form the framework for what was going to eventually be a Viking-style mead hall. Now, when you start digging giant holes and building Viking-style mead halls in your backyard, you are officially bored. And I realized that I had to find something to do with myself, aside from digging holes. And the thing is that I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't in school, I didn't have a job, and the nearest town is over half-mile drive away, and back then I didn't drive. So, and the thing is, I really believe that everyone ought to have this opportunity at least once in life, where you don't have to do anything. And whatever it is you choose to do when no one's forcing you to do anything, whether it's digging holes, or playing video games, or reading books, or math, science, engineering, whatever the case might be, that's probably what you should be pursuing as a profession. And in my case, it turned out to be telling stories. And I decided to try to tell the sort of story that I would enjoy reading myself. And since I grew up reading and loving fantasy, it was fantasy I chose. And so I said, all right, I'm gonna take all the elements I like about fantasy. I'm gonna take the wise old mentor, and the evil villain, and the dragon, and the magic sword, and the young hero, and I'm gonna take all these things and I'm gonna try to fit them into one story and see if I can write that. So I spent about a month working out the plot of the entire series. I was gonna say trilogy, but it's not a trilogy anymore, is it? I actually had another author come up to me and he said, "You do know the definition of trilogy, don't you?" But in any case, I spent a month working out the plot, and when I had it set in my head, I sat down and actually started writing Eragon. And it was really exciting, getting to write it, and I did all sorts of things in the story to try to have fun, because I figured if I had fun, you guys would have fun as well. So, for example, one of the things I did, and if you've read any of the books, which I think is probably a good guess, you'll be familiar with the character of Angela the herbalist. Yeah. And what you may or may not not know is that I based the character of Angela the herbalist on my sister, Angela. And yes, that is my sister. I didn't exaggerate. The argument about frogs and toads, that actually happened. So I did stuff like that while writing the book. Oh, and by the way, I should add, fortunately, Angela has a very good sense of humor, or else I wouldn't be standing here right now. In any case, when I finished the manuscript, I sat down and I read it through for the very first time. And I was incredibly excited. You know, I was getting to read my own book for the first time. It was horrible. It was awful. The story was there, but the writing itself needed a lot of help. So I said, all right, well, just to give you an example, and I never used to tell people this, but now that the story is out, now that the series is finished, I'm not quite so ashamed of this. But in the very first draft of Eragon, Eragon was not named Eragon. Eragon was named Kevin. And by the way, if your name is Kevin, it's a great name. But I don't think that the series would have been half so popular if it had been about the adventures of the great dragon rider, Kevin. My only excuse is that I was 15. And I also remember I had Kevin running into a unicorn at one point. So the book needed serious help. So I rewrote the first draft, and Kevin became Eragon. And then I gave the manuscript to my parents, and fortunately for me, they liked it enough that we decided we were going to self-publish the book and try to make it a family business and see what would happen. And that is exactly what we ended up doing. And I went all across the western half of the United States doing events with the self-published edition, events just like this. Although back then, I did them all while dressed in a medieval costume. It was kind of a cool costume. It was black, knee-high, lace-up leather boots, billowy black pantaloons, big black pirate belt, billowy red swordsman shirt, and a black beret to top it off. And the thing is the very first presentation I did was in our local high school. Now, I was homeschooled. This was the first time I had ever walked into a public high school. And I was the same age as the students. I was 17. And I walked in dressed like that. And when I got into the library of the school where I was doing my event, some guy in the back looked up at me, and I heard him say, and it was about this volume too, he said, "Hello, Romeo!" As you can see, I don't wear that costume anymore. But I had a lot of fun traveling around with the self-published edition. Met a lot of fun people, had some great experiences. I once arm wrestled a guy in order to get him to buy a copy of the book. Once sold a copy to a guy who did not read English. I talked him into buying it as a present for his girlfriend, so you know. And then eventually, as was mentioned earlier, the author, Carl Hyacin, caught wind of the book, and he passed it on to Random House, and the rest, as they say, is history.